and it is episode 78.
Yes, I am going to do my best to not have my internet cut out this time around. So,
So we've finally got, I think I told you before, we don't have fiber here, but fiber is coming within the next couple of months for me, so that'll be really good. So,
oh, right.
yeah, apparently it's the next couple of months. So, okay, so we've got only a few items tonight, or today. We'll see how long it takes. The great man of history is Sundiata Keita. I think few people will have heard of him.
Okay.
I didn't know his name, but I did know the empire he founded. So he founded the Mali Empire in Africa, which I believe lasted for 375 years. There've been a few. African history tends not to be very well known, and there were a few. There were a few empires in North Africa at different times. The Mali Empire is probably the best known of them, actually. But anyway, yeah, he's the founder of the Mali Empire. There's actually another man who was a prominent figure in the Mali Empire, and I may talk about him on another occasion. Apparently, this other guy was his great nephew and was believed to have been, relative to his own time, the richest person who ever lived. So. He might be worth exploring at some. Not necessarily as a great man of history, but probably would just might be interested to
Yeah.
explore. But anyway, this gentleman, Sundiata, founded the Mali Empire. So interestingly, and we're a little bit. We know he's a real person, but we're a little bit divorced from him in that his story wasn't necessarily written down for a couple of centuries after he lived. There were foreigners who visited the Mali Empire within the century or so after he died, and they talked about him, and so we're pretty well. We know from it's not just pretty confident. We know he was a real person, right? But as I said, some details may not be clear. Um, but interestingly enough, and he was crippled as a child. I'm not quite sure how that actually happened, but apparently this caused him. Yeah, people would make fun of him, and apparently they'll make fun of his mother too because he was crippled. But he went on amazingly to actually essentially lead an army and overthrow the Soso Empire at 18. So I don't know what the nature of his injury was, but whatever it was, it didn't prevent him from sort of leading an army. And he overthrew the empire of the Soso Empire, destroyed their capital. Okay, and that was the end of the Soso Empire,
Mhm.
and then established the Mali Empire. This is at age 18. So perhaps with regard and including whatever sort of physical limitations he's got, with regard to establishing the empire, he seems to have learnt from the Soso Empire a little bit, and he made his empire kind of more of a federation. That's probably a bit of a stretch, but federation-like, in that the various nations that were part of his empire had representatives at the court and could talk to the king, and so he may have made things a little bit more. Instead of sort of being dictatorial towards the subject nations, I think he was a bit more willing to take some feedback, probably realizing what had happened to the previous empire, right?
Mm.
But the thing that I really like about him is that he actually established a constitution for the empire, and it's in English it's known as the Mandan Charter, and it's actually got some. And this is we're talking. Oh yes, I didn't tell you when he was alive. So actually, so he lived from approximately 1217 to 1255. So he died at 37 or 38. I'll get to that. And as I said, he established the empire at 18. So bit of a not quite Alexander the Great, but kind of Alexander the Great sort of lifespan there, and doing great things, but shining bright, and then he was gone. So, but anyway, as I said, he actually wrote a constitution for his empire, or he rather his experts did, and he endorsed it. But it had some interesting things in it, which I think by the standards of sort of the 13th century, particularly probably in Africa, I think he was going. They were actually quite innovative. Children were to be educated. That was actually a requirement in the Constitution. Um, Slaves were allowed one day off a week. How
Okay.
innovative, how liberal is that, huh? Yeah, so not bad for its time. Apparently, slaves were allowed to own private property as well. So that actually opens the possibility of maybe even you're buying your own freedom too.
Mm.
So foreigners were not to be mistreated or maltreated in the empire. So how's that? So he actually afforded foreigners who were in the empire some level of protection.
Right.
Um, Men had a minimum age of 20 for marriage, which is actually quite old for that era.
Mm-hmm.
And women could marry as soon as they were menstruating. So, but of course,
Oh,
women tended to menstruate a little bit later than perhaps now. So you're probably looking maybe around 15 or 16 is probably pretty common
oh,
there.
okay. Yeah.
This is an interesting one, and it speaks to those claims of the historical patriarchy. You know, I mean, women were oppressed historically. The feminists would keep telling us, right? Women could divorce their husbands if they were impotent.
Uh,
So actually, some European countries had that as well. There were
mm-hmm.
some horror stories of men having to demonstrate they could have sex in Europe. I'm talking now. There was horror stories of men having to demonstrate they could have sex with their wives while a bunch of other men looked on to attest to it, the fact that they could. Um, but yeah, so here we have it as well. I don't know if they had what sort of test they used in the Mali Empire, but yes,
Yeah.
women could
That sounds
actually
like that sounds like a performance anxiety nightmare right there.
exactly. I tell you what, the pressure, man,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Uh, and if you're having trouble before, right? Yeah. So,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, yeah, so women could divorce their husbands if the men were impotent. Either spouse could divorce if the other one was insane. I don't know what standard was set. Probably
Yeah.
psychotic, sort of, yeah,
Yeah. Right.
obviously, unhinged.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so either spouse could actually get out of a marriage if they were. So these are so there are other reasons too, but
Mm-hmm.
I just picked up a few highlights there from the list of from the 44 articles of his constitution. No, he may or may not have been a Muslim. He may have adhered to traditional African tribal beliefs. However, his descendants definitely were Muslims. The Mali Empire was very much a Muslim empire, but it isn't clear whether he was or maybe his sons or grandsons or whatever took it on. I think Islam was certainly very powerful within the empire, even if he himself wasn't a Muslim.
Uh,
His cause of death is unknown. As I said, died at 37 or 38. There are various traditions. One is that he drowned while trying to cross a river.
mhm.
Another that he was accidentally killed during a ritual. Apparently, this ritual involved firing an arrow, and one story suggests that he was hit by the arrow and died. And another was he was assassinated. But apparently, most historians think he probably died
Mhm.
while trying to cross the river, which is a bit unfortunate. Who knows, what he could have done if he'd lived a bit longer. But anyway, so as I said, the Mali Empire continued for a quite respectable 375 years. So, and of course, went through into what 16th, 17th century and interacted with European powers and all sorts of things. So,
Mm.
I just wanted to, yeah, I do like to sort of pick a few men from different parts of the world because a lot of the ones from Europe or whatever in North America are very well known, etc. But I'd like to, where possible, I'd like to find someone who's a little bit less well known. And I think it's the Mali Empire is one that, as I said, that I know of. Probably don't know enough about its history, which brings me to another point actually.
Okay.
So we've seen things where stories where, for example, they'll have I don't know Mary Queen of Scots as black or something like that, which obviously is
Yeah.
historically inaccurate, right? But
Mm-hmm.
um, stories that really just destroy suspension of disbelief, right? Um, but there are actually lots of really interesting stories in Africa, and I think I have mentioned this on a previous episode briefly. There are lots of interesting stories in Africa, and they're not telling those stories, right? Instead, they're repeating the European stories that we all know. Like let's do the death of the Roman Republic again, right? Um, why don't they, if they're really interested in telling stories from an African tradition, which I think it would be great, why don't they pick up some of these stories that are not being told? Or perhaps another example might be an ancient Japanese story, or something like that, something that is not known in the Western environment at all. So anyway, just want to mention that briefly. That I think
Yeah.
that I'd love to see a sort of series on his life or something, and maybe a whole series on the Mali Empire. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
interesting stuff.
so I knew that the name sounded familiar here. So Hannah Wallen, we know Hannah Wallen from Honey Badger Radio. She
We do.
made a post talking about, well, something else that's kind of not too important to this, but She mentioned that the Lion King is primarily based on the historical African legend of Sundiata Keita, founder of the Mali Empire, the subject was something different, but she did mention it. Uh, I just wanted to kind of give her a bit of a shout out because she did also
Yeah.
talk about it. And I knew that the name sounded familiar.
Yeah, that's a
Uh,
good point. Actually, I did read that when I was prepping for it. Yeah, so apparently Disney has denied it, but apparently people have made a
mm,
pretty good case. Exactly
right.
that his story may be a major influence on it. So
Exactly.
anyway, yeah. But I would love a live action or something like that
Yeah.
story of the early
Yeah.
days of the Mali Empire. Perhaps a multi-year series going through it. I think it'd be interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so. That's all I have to say on him. But I've got a man of note this time,
Okay.
Alec Jeffrey. So Alec Jeffrey was Scottish, and sorry, I was actually maybe not. Sorry, Alec Jeffrey. I was thinking of somebody else to include in this episode,
Is
and
it Jeffrey or Jeffries?
Jeffreys.
Yeah.
Jeffreys. Thank you. I wrote it down in my notes exactly. British. Yeah, I don't think he's Scottish actually. Yeah,
Mm,
British. I was thinking of somebody else too actually who was Scottish to include in this episode, but no. Alec Jeffreys. He's a geneticist. He is still alive, having been born in 1950. Now, I think he's done his work has been really helpful for men in particular. I think, although obviously for the whole society. He discovered how to DNA fingerprint individual humans, and this has established or ruled out paternity in many, many cases. So it has allowed men to establish paternity of a child, and has also allowed men to be protected from false paternity suits. And it has also exonerated people who have been falsely accused, who are overwhelmingly men. So I think he's done. Obviously, the whole society's benefited, but I really think he's done men a great service. But
that's
yes, thank you, Alec Jeffreys. Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, the next item I want to talk about is Australian Aborigines.
Okay.
Did you have any items you wanted to cover before I went on to that?
Not in particular, do I want to remark that every time you throw these new names like right on the hour, um, uh, I have taken to looking at Grokopedia instead of Wikipedia to kind of brush myself up
Ah,
on it. So I'm just trying to
nice.
get out of the habit of Wikipedia and trying something
Yeah,
new.
yeah, yeah,
So
nice.
I'm just
So,
following along. So
so Vern and I were talking before the episode. So I either select the Great Man of History a week before, or possibly 2 hours before sometimes. So,
okay,
depending on
exactly.
how busy my week was. So unfortunately,
Yeah,
I've dropped them on Vernon a couple of times. So a few
exactly.
times.
Now,
Yeah.
now there is one thing though, before you move on.
Yeah.
You mentioned that Keita had like a childhood injury or something or the other,
Yeah.
right? Okay. The so I've already talked to you behind the scenes, but I want to. So I have my own great man of history for next time potentially,
Mm,
and he also had a
indeed.
childhood injury. So yeah.
Ah, I
So
don't know
so
anything about your great man of history, so it'll be interesting to hear about him.
okay. Well, we'll save that for later. Okay.
Yeah, but interesting that he also had a childhood injury. Interesting.
Hmm.
So, so I want to talk about Australian Aborigines, and I have talked about this subject a little bit, but there's been something new that's appeared. So this is all about woke and it's about revisionist history, and it's not just about Australian Aborigines. The same thing is happening with Native Americans. There's actually an anthropologist in the US. Her name escapes me right now, who's doing some really good work, particularly raising concerns about destruction of Native American archaeological evidence and reburial in particular, and that's happening in Australia too. Reburial of bodies that have been previously found, and just essentially revisionist archaeology, and that's exactly what we're seeing in Australia as well. So, as I said, I've previously mentioned that the new bodies are turning up. There's one particularly important site called Lake Mungo, and the bodies turn up there sometimes, and they've been turning up, periodically for 100 years or more that archaeologists have been aware of. And they used to carefully take them out and do testing. More recently, they've been doing DNA testing and all sorts of interesting stuff. Now they can't even touch them because the Aborigine local Aborigine groups control that land and aren't allowing them to be removed. And some people are claiming that some testing is allowed in situ, but I think even that's a bit dubious. If it is, it's very limited. And there's also reburial happening, and it's the same thing not happening in North America. So the reburial is done in essentially is done in such a manner as the records are destroyed once the reburial has occurred, such that the site of the reburial will be lost. There may be a handful of people who knew, and then when their frail memory, over decades, changes, they forget, and then it's all lost. So there's a real risk that we're going to lose a lot of this information, the new bodies turning up, and also ones that are being reburied. But anyway, and there's also an aspect too, and I have talked about this previously too. It's a little bit unique to Australia, that there's this idea that the Australian Aborigines were completely isolated for 65,000 years. And even proponents of that have to admit that it's not completely true, that there was contact without the outside world. But then they'll say, well, they're all but completely isolated for 65,000 years. I think that the evidence of this is pretty suspect, and that there's some pretty good counter evidence to suggest, particularly about 4,000 years ago, that there might have been a new influx of people. Some people are claiming in 2013, there was a study that basically said this, and they've tried since then to refute the study. Some people have claimed more later information has refuted the original evidence and so forth, but something probably happened about 4,000 years ago, which likely involved people coming here because new plants arrived, new animals arrived, a new language arrived, and new cultural practices arrived, and all. And some people would that's not in dispute. Some people would have us believe that this all happened without anybody settling here, and it's far more likely that it involved people settling. Anyway, what my concern, well, I'll get onto the new material soon, but my concern is that the Australian Aborigines are actually othering themselves. There are plenty of groups in history who have been othered. Essentially, for example, Jews in Europe in a variety of different times, including in Nazi Germany. And one of the things that is done when a group is othered is that everybody is told that they keep to themselves and don't mix. Okay, and the Australian Aborigines are actually making this statement about themselves historically, and I'm really concerned that in some future time, if there's a major political shift, that they may find themselves in a real bit of trouble because they've basically set themselves up to be othered. And I'm really worried that if we end up with some sort of society where race ends up becoming very important or whatever, and again we might end up with the Australian Aborigines might end up in really a bad situation. And so I think that othering themselves is a terrible idea, but that's what's happening at the moment. But so this sort of I have mentioned that before, but I want to. So there's my prediction. I hope I'm wrong. I hope in 50 or 100 years' time, everyone can say, "Oh, Rob was wrong," and it was no problem. But I am concerned that we don't know what future society is like. We don't know if we'll revisit the problems of the past. So I think they need to be a bit careful there. Um, yeah. But anyway, a large mine has apparently recently been discovered in Australia that was mined by Aborigines, who of course were a hunter-gatherer culture. And this is another point actually. A book called Dark Emu was written, which misrepresented information that had been written by early settlers, and has tried to claim that the Australian Aborigines were, engaging in agriculture and all sorts of things, which is not true. That's not, and you can look at the original books, and that's not what they said at all. So but a lot of people believe it, and now that the mine has appeared, this has kind of fed into it a little bit, and they're sort of saying, "Oh well, they were mining as well." Well, I just want to make the point that it's actually normal for hunter-gatherers to mine. That's something that hunter-gatherers did. So if you look at there are ancient mines in France, there are ancient mines in North Africa. In fact, there's a mine in Africa, which may be as much as I think 46,000 years old.
Yeah.
So humans have been mining for a very long time. We're talking about organized mining here, as in digging tunnels
Mm-hmm.
and digging pits and all the rest of it, all the things you would associate with mining, obviously
Right.
with stone tools and whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
but mining is something that is so the idea that the sort of people are proclaiming this as some sort of amazing new development, but it's actually completely normal to. It would have been surprising if they hadn't been mining. Put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a hunter-gatherer society, and hunter-gatherer societies mined. So anyway, that's the latest innovation. It sort of sparked another round of these sort of ideas about Australian Aborigines prior to European contact, uh, engaging in large scale farming and that sort of thing. The evidence just isn't there. The evidence doesn't support that. There was aquaculture, which is fish farming.
Yes.
So that we know that they did fish farm prior to European arrival, and that's not in dispute, and that's been known since the 1980s. But as in terms of large scale agriculture, in terms of taking something like wheat and farming it, no, sorry, didn't happen. For one thing, there's nothing really on the continent that no local crops or local animals have really shown themselves to be suitable for that sort of large scale agriculture. As you probably know, Vernon, there are a few different crops and animals around the world that have really helped civilization along its path. The Fertile Crescent had several of them. Had wheat and barley and oats and whatnot.
Yes.
And there was corn in Central America and so forth. And where you find those crops and those animals, civilization usually gets quite a boost because they can be farmed and exploited quite effectively. There's really nothing among the native crops that qualifies, or native animals. Anyway, so large scale agriculture, no, definitely didn't happen. There was a hunter gatherer society, and I have to, and I know I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, but I've done quite a lot of research on hunter gatherers and so forth, and I've said before, I think that agriculture was something that humans did because that was forced on them, because of population numbers, not something they chose to do. Uh,
Hmm.
when agriculture enters an area, the population has a shorter life expectancy and they're less healthy. So that's obviously not something people are going to choose. It's something that essentially was forced on the community by a growing population. Eventually, a population reaches the point where they can't hunt and gather anymore, and they start growing food, and probably happens gradually over many centuries.
Right.
So
Well,
anyway,
do you,
yeah.
yeah, do you think there's a bit of a confusion between hunter-gatherer and nomadism?
Yeah, well, there certainly can be. I mean, one of during the transitional, I just want before I get on to that, I just want to say that. So, I'm in no way disparaging the Aborigines by saying they were hunter gatherers. As I said, I think that
Yeah.
humans stayed hunter gatherers as long as they could in any given area, and only
Hmm.
transitioned when they needed to. Yeah, you're right. You're raising a good point because, and I was just wondering whether I would mention this. I'm glad you sort of brought that up. During the transition from being a hunter gatherer to being a settled population, as I said, probably takes centuries. And what they tend to do is stop, grow some food, and then move on.
Right.
And also become pastoralists too, where they herd animals. So these are sort of so people don't just stop and start. You don't have hunter gatherers one day and then they just stop, build a town, and start growing food. It's a gradual process where they rely more and more on growing food. We know that modern hunter gatherers, for example, deliberately plant plants, knowing that they will come back to that area 5, 10 years from now, and eat the food. So as they go, they deliberately implant seeds. So yeah, during that period, they would be on the move. They would be planting seeds. They would stop, maybe grow some food for a while, and they would also herd animals, which would give them a lot of nutrients instead of just hunting animals. And that's, of course, comes back to the Aborigines with the aquaculture, which might suggest that they were starting down that road, because rather than just hunting fish, you capture the fish in a pond and you just harvest them when you want them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that is one of the steps that you're likely to see. And maybe the population was getting to that point where they had to start thinking about that sort of thing. But so yeah, the people who are trying to claim that the Australian Aborigines were not hunter gatherers, I think they're looking down on hunter gatherers, and I don't think that's an appropriate way to look at it at all. The hunter gatherers lived longer and were healthier than the people who came after them. And we've only recently sort of returned to the health levels of health and height and so forth that our hunter gatherer ancestors had when they were just wandering the savannas of Africa. So I think that, yeah, we need to be honest about it and say that it was a hunter-gatherer society, and that was fine. They had not reached the population level where they needed to transition.
Do you think the fact
Um,
that they had to walk a lot, compared to the agricultural, kind of contributed to that?
Probably helped a lot. Yeah. So there's a few things they've given. So um, farmers farm things that are easy to farm. Okay,
Hmm.
and this is true today, by the way, as well.
Yeah.
Um, So as soon as farming enters an area, or they really become sedentary and start farming full time, the range of foods they eat which causes them to sometimes miss out on some nutrients, which was part of the problem. But I think you're right too. The fact they would travel a lot less and be walking a lot less probably had it was a contributing factor as well. This is actually relates to something I've been thinking about again recently about about fruits and vegetables. The fruits and vegetables we eat today are largely the varieties of, say, bananas, for example. A good example, bananas are a great example. I was actually watching a video by Sky News in the UK that was produced recently, which talked about this, and I was already familiar with this sort of concept, but it reminded me of it quite nicely. And they brought up a perfect example, the banana. So we eat mostly Cavendish bananas. There are hundreds of varieties of bananas, right?
Mhm.
We eat mostly Cavendish bananas, with ladyfinger bananas being sort of coming a far second, and everything else pretty much being non-existent in terms of commercial production. And the reason for that is that Cavendish bananas and the other fruits and vegetables we eat are essentially retain their nutrient value and retain their flavor and their texture for a long period of time. So particularly, the video pointed out from the example of the UK, and so here in Australia, bananas are all produced locally, but in the UK they're all imported. So their bananas are actually coming from the Caribbean or South America, being shipped across the Atlantic. So they need bananas that will last a couple of weeks while chilled in a ship,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
So you've got a banana. So that can last a long time. The problem with this is that bananas and the other fruits and vegetables that we eat are not necessarily the tastiest varieties of those. They're the ones that last a long time, right? So one argument that's been put forward about why people don't like fruits and vegetables as much these days as they apparently did in the past
Hmm.
is that the ones we're eating are actually not as nice as the ones that were in the past. 100
Right.
years ago, a lot of people ate food that was produced locally. My own ancestors were, up to about a couple of generations ago, were market gardeners. They lived on the edge of the city, and they weren't out in the wilderness farming large scale. They were on the edge of the city producing fruits and vegetables and whatnot and selling them into the city. Um, because they were doing that and they were getting to the market within a day or so, they could potentially eat fruits and vegetables that were perhaps
Yeah.
nicer varieties. Yeah, anyway, so it's an interesting idea that our fruits and vegetables today may not be as tasty as those of
Exactly.
people 100, and may explain why people don't like them as much. There are
Well,
places you can go on.
no, no, no. When I was a kid, I had some banana flavored snacks and so forth, right? Like, so any given banana flavored snack did not taste like any actual bananas.
That's right.
Exactly. So, they would have this really kind of nice, I can't even describe the flavor so much. I'm not a huge sweet eater, so, but, obviously, when I was a kid, I had some, but it was just so different. It's own. I wish I could identify the type of banana it's actually modeled after, because you mentioned Cavendish bananas are the kind that we have now, and obviously we know the taste of that, but it's just so different. It's I don't think we could have like a Cavendish flavored snacks and really get away with it. It's just
So I may have to send you this video because they
yeah.
actually explain what the flavor is modeled after.
Okay, you have to. Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently I've forgotten the name of the banana now. Something gross was the name of the banana. I can't remember the full name of the banana, but variety.
Mhm.
Um, apparently all banana flavors are named after are modeled after a different variety of banana, right? So
Mhm.
you've spotted that. I never realized that actually, but until it came up in this video. But you've spotted it
Yeah.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
Apparently, this banana, I'm sorry to say, was wiped out. There was a
That's what I
blight.
heard. Yes.
There was a blight about
Yeah.
100 years ago or something, and bananas are mostly clones. So they've got very low genetic diversity and they're highly susceptible to disease, which is why I mentioned earlier that all bananas in Australia are grown locally. We have strict biosecurity laws here. It is illegal to import a banana to the country without a license, to bring a banana in without a
Mhm.
license. And I don't think any licenses are granted actually for importation. But it is actually illegal to transport bananas around Australia without a license. So you can, if you're in one part of Australia and you get on a plane with a banana, I'm not kidding, and fly to another part of Australia, you may be committing a criminal offence
Mhm.
because it's that serious. So the state I live in actually has four biosecurity zones for bananas. So even traveling to the north of the state, if I jumped in my car with a banana and went to the north to Cairns, I'd be committing an offence. So and it's marked on the highways, do not bring bananas past this point and so forth. But that's how strict, that's how seriously they take it because bananas have such low genetic diversity. So does wheat, by the way. Not as bad as bananas, but wheat has very low genetic diversity as well, and is at a bit of a risk of being wiped out, and that would cause a famine if that happened. But so um, yeah. Anyway, so it is interesting that you yeah, particularly picked up on the flavor. I'd never realised that. I know I did sort of think that they were quite sweet, but yeah, it's actually a distinct variety. And those
Yeah.
were bananas that people ate because they were also apparently kept. They also apparently kept well and were really nice. But this blight wiped them out, and apparently Cavendishes have a blight at the moment. That's appeared since the 1980s, and there is a bit of a risk that Cavendishes might go the same way, which is, I think, another reason why Australia is so strict on it as well. So yeah,
Well,
enjoy your
what will be
Cavendishes for
left?
now.
What will
Ladyfinger,
be left?
maybe. Yeah,
Ladyfinger?
ladyfinger,
Okay.
and maybe, hopefully, maybe they can try breeding a new variety or crossbreeding or something like that.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to say on this topic was there are places you can eat these sort of alternative varieties. I recall reading, I don't know if it's still around, but there was a farm in the southern part of Australia for a long time where they grew apple trees from a wide variety of apple
Mm.
plants. And people would go there and pay a few dollars or whatever, and they would basically try different sorts of apples that you don't normally get. And it's because,
Mm.
again, it's because they don't keep for very long. But you have to go there and eat them fresh. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is I actually ate I think one or two of Newton's apples. So I think I did mention this on a previous episode. There's an apple tree now deceased. The original tree is gone, died in the 18th century, but it came from the Newton farm where Sir Isaac Newton. It was actually during a pandemic of all things. During he was sent home from university due to a pandemic, and he developed the theory of gravitation while he was home. And there's an apple tree that tradition says he sat under while he was thinking about gravitation, and that's where the old story of an apple falling on his head comes from. So there really was a tree on the Newton farm.
Yeah.
In the 18th century or something, it was struck by lightning, and I think it died, or died, it damaged in some way, and it died. But before that, they had taken cultivars of it, or cuts of it, and they had planted them. So there are by there were already other trees that were genetically identical to the original Newton tree,
Yeah.
and they've since transported them all around the world. So there's several hundred of them that are known to exist. And I visited the Parkes Observatory a radio observatory in Australia a few years ago, and I'd really wanted to go for a long time. And it's not quite in the outback, but it's certainly getting there. And I finally found myself passing through that particular part of the world, and I managed to, just sort of an hour diversion or whatever to just, go there. And we spent a few hours looking at the at the at the satellite. It's quite relaxing actually watching it, scanning the sky. It was actually featured in a movie called The Dish, actually, by the way. It was sort of a comedy
Okay.
set around the first moon landing, where the Parkes Observatory really was involved in that. So they dramatised the story, and but it's also a bit of a comedy too. Great movie if you haven't seen it, called The Dish.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So anyway, but at the Parkes Observatory, they have half a dozen Newton apples trees.
Mm.
So my wife actually said, "Can we just take some?" And they said, "Sure." So we
Oh,
picked
good.
half a dozen apples off the trees and tried them. Now that was great. The apples, not amazing.
Oh, really?
After all that, the apples were not great. They lack they lack flavor, and they lack a lot of juice. They're quite floury in their texture as well. And I suspect they're kind
Uh,
of what apples probably were like in the 18th or 16th century or something, right? So because we know
mhm.
fruits changed over the
Yeah.
centuries, fruit and vegetables. So I suspect that it's really a window into the past, and this is what a 16th century person was eating when they ate an apple. So not nearly as nice as our apples, but I'm very glad I tried one. Yeah.
So it looks like some things improved, some things declined.
Oh yes, there's actually a there's actually a painting of a watermelon. It's from the
Mm,
17th or 18th centuries, and it's distinctly different to watermelons of today. There's a
mm,
lot less of the red flesh that we'd eat, and a lot more of the white flesh that we normally don't eat. So
okay.
it's a good demonstration of how over the centuries selective breeding has produced fruit and vegetables that are sort of more to our liking. I mean, we know corn's like that. Ancient corn is very different to modern corn.
That's what I
So
heard.
we're essentially, yeah, we essentially keep breeding food, fruits and vegetables, and animals too, to be more to our liking. So, but yeah, so I think I like to think that that's what apples tasted like in the 16th century. So, you know,
Yeah,
I guess if you were in the 16th century, you were excited by that, but you know,
exactly. Well,
maybe,
when you described the apple to me, I imagined a really mushy kind of an apple. So, so I'm just
yeah,
kind of
it wasn't
imagine.
crisp. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I'm imagining that apple hitting Newton.
yeah, right. I see what you mean.
Did it bounce off his head or did it kind of
I
splat?
didn't think of that. That's right. It was actually might be more dense, so it gave a bit of a whack. That's right.
Hmm. Right.
Yep. So it is interesting though to look at these sorts of things.
Exactly.
So, but no, nice catch on the banana flavors. I knew I realized that was sweeter, but I never thought of them being another variety. I just thought they'd never
Yeah,
added sugar or something. But it's actually true. They come from another variety that we don't have anymore. Yeah.
exactly. That's just something I learned at some point. It's just it's a very nostalgic quality that it's kind of hard to find nowadays as well. I kind of
Yeah.
remember these tiny chocolate bananas. They're actually shaped like bananas, but there's chocolate inside them, and they had this old this old school. You really need to tell me the name of this banana, but that
Yes.
flavor and yeah.
Yes.
So
Let's see if I can
yeah.
find it very quickly.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah, but funny what you're
Gross
mentioning
Michael.
fruit. Gross Michael?
Gross Gross Michael. Yeah.
Mm,
Michel. Gross Michael.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That which translate often translated known as Big Mike.
Big Mike.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. I think I'm looking at Wikipedia. I think Wikipedia is claiming they still exist, but at the very least, they're not produced in large numbers anymore because of the blight. I think attempts to prevent the blight have been unsuccessful. So, so in
Yeah.
effect, I guess if you
I'm
tried to grow them, they just all get the blight again. Yeah,
yeah, that's not good. Well, I mean I've heard that they were extinct myself, so
yeah, that's what I thought I'd understood. So maybe Wikipedia's wrong. That's right. There we go. I'll have to check Wikipedia later. Yep. Um, So yes, I think that's what they said on the video, but I'll dig up the video and I'll send it to you, and maybe I can even drop it in the comments or something. So
yeah,
it's
sure.
actually it's only about 12 minutes long. It's actually really interesting.
Okay. Sounds fun.
Yeah. So anyway, right. So that started with a discussion of Australian Aborigines and agriculture and so forth. But there is something else I wanted to mention about Australian Aborigines, and I have mentioned this before, I'm sure, but I think it's important enough to mention again. So we you get all this stuff about agriculture, they were farming and all the rest of it, which was just not supported by the evidence. Okay. And I think the reasons why people are saying this is sort of insincere as well. They're not making, they're not, I think they don't really believe this. A lot of the people who are writing these books, I think it's quite insincere. But the Australian Aborigines did create an innovation, which I think either was never invented by anybody else or only ever saw very limited use anywhere else, right?
Okay.
And it was widely used in Australia. And I'm not talking about the boomerang, by the way. The
Right.
boomerang,
That's
this is everything I've just said is also true of the boomerang, but I'm
mhm.
not talking about the boomerang. Um, but but it's never talked about, and I really don't know why, because it really is quite and I think it's a very neat innovation. So it's called a skin group. Um, and I remember I was telling someone about this at a party or something once, and this woman said, "Oh, I've never heard of that." And I said, "Exactly, right."
Mhm.
I think she was trying to imply I'd made it up or something, but no, skin
Oh,
groups are
okay.
real. Yeah. But I think a few people laughed. I said, "Exactly, nobody's heard of it, right?"
Right.
So, what it is that in a non-literate society, you've got a problem. So, in a society that isn't tracking genealogy, How do you remember who's you're in a small tribal group? There might be 30 or 50 members of the tribe. There may people may marry out of tribal or to other tribal groups or whatever, but nevertheless, a lot of people are together a lot of the time, and there are going to be marriages within the tribe. And how do you make sure that people aren't marrying and having kids with other people who they're quite closely related to,
Hmm.
resulting in inbreeding? A literate society can simply track genealogy, right? And actually, it'd be interesting to sort of know maybe how, say, ancient Europeans did it, because as far as I know,
Yeah.
skin groups, as I said, if they appeared anywhere else, they never saw limited use. Aborigines invented a system called skin groups. Now, everybody was born with a skin group. So in that sense, you can think of it like a star sign. It's based on your birth, right?
Sure.
And but not the date. But it's something you carry your entire life, and it never changes for your entire life, right? So even if people don't believe in astrology, you can ask pretty much anybody what their star sign is, and they'll be able to tell you, right?
Yeah.
A skin group is like that, but skin group is based on the skin groups of your parents, but you do not have the skin groups of either of your parents, and that's very, very important. And in any given tribe, there were either 8, 16, or 32 skin groups. I believe they did find some with 32. You'll actually end up with a skin group the same as one of your great grandparents if there were 8, and then further back if it was 16 or 32.
Okay.
What this I know it's probably sounding a bit confusing. Maybe one day I may put a diagram together. What
Sure.
happens is that let's just say they're called A through G for example, right?
Hmm.
And if your father is an A, and because your father is an A, he's only allowed to marry and have children with a woman who's an E. That's the law, and it's actual fact within the tribe. There's a strict no violation of this rule. So if he fancies some woman who happened to be a C, sorry, he's plumb out of luck. He can only marry an E. They're the only women eligible for him to marry.
Hmm.
So he eventually finds and marries an E, whether she's from that tribe or another one, whatever, and they have a child. All their children are C's. Okay, so they do not have the skin group of either of their parents. But C's can only marry G or something like that,
Right.
right? And the C and the G have a child and they have another skin group again, and eventually it rotates back and somebody will end up with eventually some descendant will end up with the C skin group. And the whole idea behind this, I know it probably sounds a bit confusing, but the whole idea behind this is to guarantee that you won't marry anybody who's too and have kids with anybody who's too genetically close to you. So essentially, you pretty much have to be only second cousins or something along those lines.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but by strictly adhering to this, you guarantee that you won't ever have inbreeding, close inbreeding.
Is
So
this is this a sort of tagging or some kind of branding? Is that
yes,
what it
yes,
is? Okay, yeah.
yes, that's
That's
exactly what it is. Yeah,
I've been trying to parse what you meant by skin group.
yes, that's
Is it
right.
something you can
That's why I
tell or
likened
something
it
you
to.
give? So yeah,
Yeah, I likened it to a star sign because that's the closest equivalent we have, which is based on your
yeah.
date of birth. This is based on your parentage,
Hmm.
but you know it. I mean, your parents knew ahead of time what you would be because it's the simple combination of their skin group. So A plus
Yeah,
E equals C, right?
yeah.
And so all their kids will be C, and then the kids would have to marry, G's or whatever, and on it goes over the generations.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's essentially a tag which the person carries with their entire life is completely immutable,
Yeah.
cannot change, and completely defines who they may marry.
Mhm.
And I suppose since they always knew that was the case, they probably a young man who was a C, for example, would would only ever consider G's or something. He wouldn't even think
Right.
he would never even think of anybody else because
Yeah.
they were completely off limits. Yeah, and I think
Um.
violating it was
Yeah.
pretty severely dealt with.
Okay. I don't know why, but the scarlet letter just popped in my head. You know,
Go on.
no. Just the analogy of branding an A onto
Oh,
someone.
yeah. They in
Yeah,
fact
I know
had
it's not. It's
they
not
had
good.
names for them, but obviously
I
names
get it.
vary by tribe
Mhm.
and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. I get
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's just an analogy that just popped up in my
Right,
head.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, so yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's a tag essentially that that stuck you're stuck with for life, for better or worse. That's it.
Mhm.
It
Right.
defines your destiny, at least in terms of who you're going to marry.
Mhm.
So. Anyway, so skin groups were a significant innovation because they avoided, and they probably were particularly useful in the harsh Australian environment where, particularly, a lot of the tribes, there were relatively few people around, and they perhaps, particularly in some of the more remote areas, they often didn't encounter other groups that much. So marriages
Yeah.
within their own tribal group probably fairly common, and yeah, it guaranteed that you been. And how they came up with it, nobody can really say. But I think it's really innovative and
Yeah.
allows you and you can avoid inbreeding without any sort of tracking beyond knowing what your parents' skin groups were and what yours is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and therefore what your
Absolutely.
children's will be. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course.
So,
Yeah.
but I think that if they want to talk about something innovative they did, along with boomerangs, that's a great thing. It never gets mentioned. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know if I've actually heard of a skin group before. So.
No, no, it's not well known at all. So,
Mm.
um, and the only thing I have left is Zoe McClellan.
I think I
Shall
am good.
I?
Obviously,
Okay.
I'll have something for next time. But I think this is a nice compact episode. Not too short, not too long.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. Yeah, I haven't been tracking the time, but I think it's about right. So,
Yeah.
all right. As of July 2026, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. And I've been repeating this message for several years now. She has to be somewhere.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
All right.
See you next time.
Yes. See ya.
Bye.